Usually when we talk about making an impression on someone, there's this underlying cultural expectation of volume.
Oh,
Like
right.
it's almost a theatrical performance or, a fireworks show. The assumption is just that you walk into a room, you drop this brilliant, perfectly timed joke,
Right.
you tell a wild, captivating story, and the crowd just gasps in awe. We totally equate memorability with extroversion and, well, spectacle.
Yeah, it feels very binary. Like
Yeah.
the assumption is that charisma is loud, it's flashy, and it's instantly visible. If
Exactly.
you aren't, commanding the absolute center of the room, you're just fading into the wallpaper.
Flashy or not flashy, it's a performance. And honestly, looking at the modern social landscape, it's an incredibly intimidating standard to hold yourself to. I mean, it assumes that every single social interaction is a TED Talk waiting to happen.
And it's exhausting. We
Right.
culturally buy into this idea that we have to be the absolute most fascinating yet dazzling person in the room if we want anyone to remember us the next day.
Right, like we have to earn our spot.
Exactly.
Mm.
We think memorability is about emitting the brightest light. But when you look closely at the actual mechanics of human connection, that kind of subliminal stage lighting is exactly what Leil Lowndes unpacks in this next phase of her masterclass, How to Talk to Anyone.
Yeah.
It's really not about how brightly you shine. It's about how you light the stage for everyone else.
That is exactly the shift we're making today. And welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Our mission here is always taking a stack of sources, in this case, Leil Lowndes' classic book, and extracting the absolute most important nuggets of knowledge so you get a shortcut to being well-informed.
And this is part of our continuing journey through the book, right?
Yeah, in our previous deep dive, we spent a lot of time on the immediate aftermath of saying hello, like techniques 11 through 20. We explored how to read initial conversational clues, how to listen, and, how to keep the other person involved.
Like the triage phase. How do you prevent that awkward, agonizing silence right after the intros?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today, okay, let's unpack this. The conversation is alive, the patient is stabilized.
Yes.
So the question shifts from how do I keep talking to how do I leave people with a stronger feeling of who I am? We're moving into techniques 21 through 30.
And this is where Lowndes really moves from basic social survival into genuine social polish. She frames this entire section around a really counterintuitive thesis for you listening. She says, memorable conversation isn't just about sounding smart.
Right.
It doesn't stem from a vast vocabulary. It stems from generosity, from positivity, specificity, verbal freshness, and knowing how to frame yourself and others.
Social generosity. I really want to linger on that phrase because it leads us perfectly into the first major concept for today. Lowndes calls it the encore.
Ah, yes, the encore.
The fundamental idea is that one of the absolute best ways to become memorable yourself is to deliberate help other people become memorable. It's asking someone to retell a story you already know, specifically because you know it's going to make them look fantastic in front of the group.
It's such a brilliant move, and it's deeply rooted in human psychology. Think about the dynamic of an encore at a concert.
Right. You only want more if it was good.
Exactly. You only ask a band to come back out if the performance was spectacular. So when you ask a peer for an encore in a social setting, you're conferring an immense amount of social status on them.
Oh, for sure.
We all have our greatest hits, right? Our favorite stories where we were the hero or the funniest person. Having an audience specifically request that story is a massive ego boost.
And she shares this incredibly vivid, slightly chaotic anecdote from her own past to show how this works. Long before she was a communication expert, she actually worked as a cruise director on a ship.
I love this story.
It's so good. So this ship had a very specific demographic split. It was mostly Italian officers and mostly American passengers. And as you can imagine, there was a massive language and cultural barrier.
Yeah, the classic party divide.
Right. The officers spoke broken English, so after the captain's initial address, they would all just instinctively clump together in the corner of the ballroom, chatting in Italian.
Naturally, people gravitate toward what's safe.
Exactly. While the American passengers just awkwardly mingled on their own. So her entire job as cruise director was to shatter that dynamic. She needed them to mingle. And her tactic was not subtle at all.
Not even a little bit.
She would physically grab an officer by the arm, drag him over to a group of smiling passengers, and say something like, "Captain, why don't you tell these folks about that dramatic midnight rescue you made last week?"
I just love the visual of her literally dragging a highly decorated ship captain across a ballroom floor.
I know, right? But the psychological mechanism worked flawlessly. She knew the story was dramatic and heroic, and by prompting him in front of an eager audience, she removed all the friction.
He didn't have to awkwardly introduce himself.
No, he just started telling the story, the passengers were captivated, and then she would just slip away and do it again with someone else.
She was a social catalyst, and what's so important to extract here is the subtext of the request. When you're in a circle of acquaintances and you turn to your friend and say, "Hey, John, you have to tell everyone how you negotiated that insane deal last month." The unspoken message isn't really about the deal.
Right.
The message is, that story was so terrific and you were so inherently fascinating, I want my other friends to experience how great you are. It's pure validation. Only crowd pleasers get asked for encores.
But wait, I have to push back here. Doesn't that just make you, like, a manipulative hype man?
How so?
Well, if I'm constantly walking around just setting up my friends to tell their best stories,
Ah,
am I actually engaging in conversation or am I just acting as their PR agent?
right.
Where is the line between being a generous conversationalist and just performing this calculated social strategy?
That is the essential tension with this strategy, and it's a very fair critique. The line between being generous and being a manipulative sycophant entirely comes down to your intent. Lowndes is very clear. You should never ask for an encore of a story you genuinely found boring, or just to flatter someone. People have highly sensitive radar for fake flattery. If you're buttering someone up just because you want a promotion, they'll sense the hollowness.
Yeah, that makes sense. I kind of like to think of it less like a PR agent and more like an alley-oop in basketball.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, you are setting them up for the slam dunk or like being the opening act for a rock band. You go out, you warm up the crowd, so when the main act steps up, the crowd is primed. Introducing a new story to a cold group is socially risky.
Yes.
By asking for the encore, you're absorbing that risk for them. You're handing them a warmed-up crowd.
You're providing the social scaffolding so they can shine. But there is a massive, vitally important caveat to this that we have to discuss. If you execute this poorly, it is a conversational fatality.
The warning label. Yes, what is it?
Lowndes warns. You must make absolutely certain that the story you're requesting is one where the teller comes out as the big winner and not the buffoon.
Oh, yeah. You definitely do not say, "Hey, everyone, Bug has to tell you about the time he got blackout drunk and crashed his car."
Yeah, exactly. Even if Bob told you that story in private as a funny, self-deprecating anecdote, forcing him to tell it to a group completely strips him of his agency.
Right, because self-deprecation is a tool only you can wield for yourself.
Yes. When you force it on someone else, it's not self-deprecation, it's humiliation. You make them look foolish, and you make the audience super uncomfortable. One way to become memorable is to help other people become memorable, but positively.
It fundamentally comes down to building psychological safety, which, actually bridges us perfectly into the next major phase of Lowndes' philosophy, because setting others up to shine builds warmth. And that leads to her rule about the fragility of early conversations and why keeping things positive is crucial. Technique 22. Accentuate the positive.
This is such a crucial pivot. The concept here is that you really need to avoid negative topics, personal problems, or emotional baggage early in an interaction.
Now, I know this runs totally counter to a lot of modern advice.
Oh, entirely.
We live in an era that absolutely fetishizes vulnerability. We hear constantly that sharing flaws makes us authentic. You see people trauma dumping on first dates because they think it's relatable.
But what's fascinating here is the nuance Lowndes brings up. She talks about the phenomenon of endearing little flubs. Sometimes people think revealing a flaw automatically brings people closer, and she points to historical examples that seem to prove this.
Like what?
Well, like Adlai Stevenson, the presidential candidate, who was once photographed with a visible hole in the sole of his shoe.
Oh, and the public loved it.
They absolutely loved it. Or George Bush Sr., who publicly admitted he absolutely hated broccoli.
Right. It made the leader of the free world seem like a stubborn kid. It was charming.
Exactly. So the logical conclusion people draw is, if it works for the president, I should tell everyone at this networking breakfast about how I locked my keys in my car and cried.
Right. But that logic fails, right?
Completely. Because it ignores the timing of vulnerability and the psychology of status. There's a famous principle called the pratfall effect. Research shows that revealing a foible only increases your appeal if you are already perceived as highly competent or above the audience in stature.
Ah, I see. So if you're an untouchable superstar, revealing a flaw bridges the gap. It says, I'm human like you.
Yes. But, and this is critical, if you are on equal footing, We're trying to build a new connection, keep the skeletons in the closet. If you launch into a heavy monologue about your divorce to a peer, you aren't bridging a gap, you're just overwhelming a stranger.
Right. And I really want to frame this not as being fake, but as understanding timing. People argue if I'm having a terrible week, pretending I'm not is lying, but early conversation is just so fragile.
It really is.
I think of it like building a campfire. When you first meet, all you have are tiny sparks. You feed them with light kindling, the weather a compliment. If you drop a massive waterlogged log of emotional trauma on it, you smother the fire completely.
It crushes the connection before it even generates heat. People need warmth and ease before they can handle heaviness.
Exactly. So you're filtering out the negative, but that means you need to make sure you actually have something light and engaging to replace it with, which requires quiet preparation before you even leave your house. Technique 23, the latest news.
Yes, good conversation often looks totally spontaneous, but it is supported by quiet preparation. Socially skilled people do not enter the world empty-handed.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the example she uses is easily the craziest in the book. She interviewed Sydney Biddle Barrows, the famed Mayflower madam.
A fascinating sociological case study.
Right. Barrows ran a highly lucrative escort service in New York, and she required all of her independent contractors to rigorously keep up with the daily news. They had to read the paper before appointments.
Which sounds absurd on the surface. Why would an escort service mandate current events?
Exactly. But Barrows looked at the data. She realized that 60% of their book time was spent just chatting. And when the women became better conversationalists, business skyrocketed.
It speaks volumes about human loneliness. These clients were paying for intimacy, but a massive component of that was having an engaging conversation with a well-informed person.
So how do we apply that to like a Tuesday morning Zoom meeting?
Well, the defensive move here is that knowing the big deal news of the moment is your most important conversational prop. It acts as a defense against foot and mouth disease.
Oh, man, yeah.
You don't want to walk into a room, say, what's the good news, and find out there was just a massive global tragedy. Scanning the news gives you the emotional temperature of the world.
I compare it to stretching before a workout. You don't know exactly what moves you'll make, but you're limbered up. You scan the news not to be a walking ticker tape, but to ensure you're never caught with absolutely nothing to say.
Exactly. It provides low-friction conversational fodder.
So you're prepared with external news. But what happens when the conversation inevitably turns back to you and someone asks the most dreaded conversational default question? Technique 24. What do you do not?
Yes, the absolute ban on the phrase, what do you do?
It's the default setting for almost every adult in Western culture. You shake hands and you ask it. But Lowndes says it's limiting and automatic.
She goes further. She details why big boys and girls completely avoid this. She calls it the 4 dirty words. When you ask, what do? You label yourself as one of 4 things: a ruthless networker, a social climber, a gold digger, or someone who has never strolled along Easy Street.
Wait, Easy Street, like wealthy people?
Yes, she shares a story of being at a high society event and realizing nobody asked that question because on Easy Street, identity is decoupled from labor. They don't work for a living in a 9-to-5 sense.
Right.
So asking that marks you as someone outside that mindset. But even outside high society, the question violently compresses people's lives. It belittles people who have chosen non-traditional paths.
It's like a stay-at-home parent.
Exactly. They feel forced to humbly answer, oh, I'm just a housewife, or I'm between things.
It boxes them in. So what is the alternative? Lowndes offers an 8-word solution, right?
She does. A
Right.
very gracious solution.
Yeah.
How do you spend most of your time?
Okay, I have to be honest. Doesn't that sound a bit overly calculated? Like, if a stranger asks me that holding a plastic cup of wine, I'm going to feel like I stumbled into a life coaching seminar.
It's a valid reaction. It can feel slightly formal at first, but a better question gives people more room to reveal themselves.
How so?
Well, think of the optionality. If you ask a workaholic, they'll eagerly talk about their tech startup because that is how they spend their time.
Right, so you don't lose them.
But if you ask someone who works a mundane data entry job just to pay rent, but spends every weekend restoring vintage motorcycles, if you ask, what do you do? Well, they talk about data entry and everyone is bored. If you ask, how do you spend your time? They bypass the day job and jump straight to the motorcycles.
You hand them the steering wheel. That makes sense. By giving others the freedom to define themselves, you avoid boxing them in. But, and here's the catch-4s, what happens when the tables are turned and they inevitably ask you about your life?
Right, because they will.
Technique 25. The nutshell resume. If people ask about you, do not give them a dead end, like a one-word answer, I'm an accountant.
I'm a podcaster.
Right. You leave them scrambling. You have to give them a small story they can enter.
Lowndes highlights two great examples. First, Roberto, who prepared two different resumes for two different jobs. One highlighted sales for an ice cream company, the other highlighted strategic planning for a fast food chain.
Because he tailored it to the specific audience.
Exactly. And the second example is Gloria, the hairdresser. She doesn't just say, I'm a hairdresser. When a corporate lawyer asks, she says, I specialize in flexible hairstyles for the businesswoman.
Ah, the benefit statement.
Oh, yes. Top communicators create an oral nutshell resume that acts as a benefit statement. Every job has a benefit to humankind. Don't say, real estate agent. Say, I help people moving into our area find the right home.
It's like adjusting the focal length on a camera. You have this massive panoramic life, but you bring into focus the specific part that connects with the specific person standing right in front of you.
Exactly.
So crafting the perfect nutshell resume isn't just about facts. It's heavily dependent on the exact words you use. Which brings us to techniques 26 and 28, personal thesaurus and commutation.
This is where we look at fresher language. Lowndes believes ordinary words can make us disappear into the background.
Yeah.
Memorable people describe ordinary things in slightly less ordinary ways.
Right, the personal thesaurus. But the real powerhouse is communication, technique 28.
It's a highly tactical linguistic trick. It's about systematically starting sentences with the word you.
Let's talk about the Golden Gate Bridge anecdote because it perfectly illustrates this.
It's a great case study. Lowndes got hopelessly lost in San Francisco. She pulled over and asked a couple, excuse me, I can't find the Golden Gate Bridge.
They just shrugged, right?
Total apathy, because it was focused entirely on her. So she tried another couple, excuse me, where's the Golden Gate Bridge? She got a vague point in the opposite direction.
With still no connection.
Right. So she tested her communication theory. She rolled down the window to a third couple and asked, excuse me, could you tell me where the Golden Gate Bridge is? Or are you able to give me directions?
And it completely changed the dynamic.
Instantly. They stopped, smiled warmly, and gave her explicit instructions. Because asking, are you able, hits their pride button. It challenges their local knowledge.
So what does this all mean? It means making language specific, vivid, or focused entirely on the listener makes someone sound more alive without sounding artificial. You pull them onto the center of the stage.
Exactly. You make them the grammatical subject.
But if using fresh, targeted language keeps the listener engaged, there is an equal and opposite force that instantly puts a listener's brain to sleep. Technique 30, don't touch a cliché with a 10-foot pole.
The cliché is the ultimate enemy of memorability.
Why do they actively weaken conversation?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, a cliché is language that arrives before thought. It makes people sound automatic, borrowed, and mentally absent.
Like saying, it is what it is.
Exactly. When strangers meet, they toss clichés back and forth as a low-level buffer because it requires zero caloric energy.
But wait, aren't cliches useful social lubricants when we don't know what else to say? Isn't it better to say, boy, time really flies, rather than standing in agonizing silence?
They serve a purpose as a buffer, yes. But Lowndes wants people to sound awake when they speak. A cliché signals to the other person that you are running on autopilot. And if you're on autopilot, why should they pay active attention to you?
That's a harsh truth. It's like receiving an automated marketing email versus a handwritten note.
Exactly. To be memorable, you have to break the automated script.
But, okay, preparing your nutshell resume, checking the news, actively avoiding cliches, injecting you into sentences, this all sounds like a lot of work, which brings up a critical question.
Let's hear it.
Can trying to sound polished make someone seem fake? I mean, is preparing stories, scanning headlines, and calculating benefit statements manipulative? Where is the line between becoming more expressive and just performing a persona?
It's the central philosophical tension of the book. And the balanced answer here really comes down to intent. These techniques absolutely become shallow if they're used simply to impress people at any cost, or to extract value from them.
Right, like that hyper-slick used car salesman energy.
Precisely. But they become deeply valuable if they help someone communicate with more care, clarity, and attention. It's like learning to play the piano. At first, you're calculating every finger movement, it feels mechanical, but you do the rigorous work so that eventually you can play a beautiful piece of music that moves the listener.
The technique serves the connection. I love that. And true social polish is actually an act of sincerity. It takes effort to ensure your listener isn't bored, to set them up for an encore, and to frame your job in a way that includes them. That effort is the opposite of apathy.
It's a gift you bring to the interaction.
So as we wrap up, how does this connect to the larger structure of the book?
Well, Lowndes is building the book in layers.
Mm-hmm.
Techniques 1 through 10 showed how people read your presence before you even speak. Techniques 11 through 20 showed how the very first spoken moments open the conversational door.
Right.
And now, techniques 21 through 30 prove that conversation becomes truly memorable through generosity, positivity, preparation, and verbal freshness.
It's a clear progression from presence to connection to lasting resonance. And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. Maybe being memorable in conversation is not about how brilliantly you speak or how fascinating your own life is. Maybe true memorability is simply about the specific emotional footprint you leave behind in the room, the way you made the other person feel about themselves.
A powerful thought to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to try out just one technique, maybe the encore or the 8-word alternative to what do you do in your next conversation. Notice the shift. Until next time.